Hey everybody, we're gonna wait for Joe to join here. There we go. Let me get him added. Hey Joe,
What's up?
how you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Good to see you.
Good. Good to see you too.
Looks like we've already got some folks joining. Welcome to Joe Morocco from List and Beisler. I guess I'm kind of just curious what you've been up to for the past couple of weeks. With all the craziness that's been going on. Are you still getting coffee samples in? I'm not trying to jump the gun, but is your kind of day to day still looking relatively normal from an importer perspective?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, we're getting a lot of samples in, definitely. We've got new coffees that we have been putting on the books. Guatemala, Ethiopia, Honduras is just now arriving. So things are still rolling, just kind of rolling a little bit more slowly than usual. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean
How about you
that
all?
yeah, it's been about the same. We luckily had a lot of contracts that, hey, you want to do that? Have one of us go up and down.
I was wondering if it would switch me, but it won't.
I actually made that mistake. We were doing a live feed for a virtual coffee festival, and I was actually using this camera to like look at a projector of a video that was on the
Uh-huh.
wall behind us, and I turned it sideways, and I started getting all these messages that are like, "Your screen is sideways. Your screen is sideways." It does not switch for you. So maybe that's a good
It's a
bug
bummer.
fix program. Um, yeah, things have been relatively, I would say, normal from a importer perspective from us. Obviously, our outgoing coffee was impacted pretty heavily by the original COVID shutdown, and North
Yeah.
Carolina tooling around with the idea of shutting things down again based on the additional testing that's being done and some upticks since phase
Mm.
two. For us, we're in phase two, which is not everything is totally back open again, but some stuff is. Um, so we've luckily had some contracts that we're still working through. Um, Sampling has definitely been a little bit harder. Even from talking about like getting stuff out of Peru, just because the lockdowns were so strict there that there's not even planes flying from Jaén to Lima as much anymore, and getting down off the mountain from Chirinos. That's been more of a challenge just because the individual towns have tried to lock down, as I'm sure we'll discuss here. But yeah, so we're
Hmm.
still working through old coffees, old contract coffees, and hoping that by the time we need our fresh stuff in, the samples are going to be a little bit easier to come by. So,
Yeah.
um, well, thanks everybody. We're right at 12:30 here, so I guess we can go ahead and get started. So this is episode two. Um, of our Lunch and Listen series. So back at the beginning of May, we decided that, with all of this shutdown happening, we weren't really able to interact in person with folks as much anymore as we would otherwise be able to from an educational perspective. So this Lunch and Listen series was born out of that as an idea to put content, coffee related content, back out into the world for public consumption and just try and keep the conversations about what's happening in the coffee world going because it is a global supply chain that a lot of people impact and are impacted by. So the Lunch and Listens will cover everything from technical topics like we'll probably get into a little bit today, all the way down to next week's is busting some coffee myths like should you freeze coffee or not. So there's a little bit of something for everybody. And today I'm really honored to have Joe Morocco join us. Joe was the first person. This is my favorite Joe story. Joe is the first person that I ever took formal coffee training from, and really, no pun intended, lit the fire under my roasting career. And he's one of the main reasons that Pure Intentions is what it is today. So he's a huge mentor of mine in the specialty coffee world, and it is an incredible honor to have him here to share an immense amount of knowledge that he has in his mind, at least hopefully a little bit over the next half an hour or so. Joe, I'll let you give a little introduction and maybe talk about your current position a little bit in the company that you're currently with.
Sounds good. Yeah, my name is Joe, and I work with List and Beisler here in the USA. The company has been around for over 100 years, actually almost 120 years, but we're just starting to venture into having an office here and a base here in the U.S. We've sold a lot of coffee in the U.S. in the past, but it's all been from Germany, where our headquarters are. And so now we're kind of firing things up here more locally. So I'm helping to head up that endeavor. And you can follow List Beisler USA on our Instagram page, kind of follow along with what we're doing there. And I sell green coffee and teach people about all things coffee, basically. I'm a roaster nerd, I'm a barista nerd, and a green coffee nerd. So thanks for joining, and hopefully we can get some good information and education out there today.
Yeah, for sure. As we kind of go through this, if the attendees want to type any questions that you may have down in the comment field, I'll be able to scroll back through that later on. And we can also just have this as kind of a general discussion. So if I know that they're on Instagram Live, there's a little bit of a lag. So if you ask a question, just maybe bear with us as they come scrolling through on our comment feed, and we can get all of your questions or comments addressed. I think, from my perspective, one of the questions that I want to just get the ball rolling with for you, Joe, is you've had so many different experiences in the specialty coffee world from you were like a production roaster for a long time was it Caldi back in the day?
Mm-hmm. Caldi's coffee roasting company in St. Louis. Yep. So
then, working with Cafe Imports and now List and Beisler, you've just really had a very grand scope of the specialty coffee world. So, can you share with us a little bit? This might be a bit of an in-depth question, but from where you started to where you are now, do you have like a favorite place to be in the specialty coffee world, or is it kind of more of a journey beyond anything else?
I am not really. I'm kind of weird in that I don't have favorites on a lot of things. I'm kind of like an in the moment kind of person. So I love sharing information and culinary experiences with people. So whether that's through education or whether that's through handing somebody a cup of coffee or cupping coffee with a person, or whatever that may be, that moment of sharing where you see somebody's face light up due to either the flavor that they're experiencing or the conversation, that's really, I guess, my favorite thing. And through, when I was a barista, I got that by handing a cup of coffee across the counter. When I was a roaster, I got that by handing a bag of coffee to a person, or tasting it with my team, experiencing what we were doing on the roasting side of things with the team. Through education, I've gotten that through all of those aha moments that I get to share with people. And in green coffee, I get that through the conversations that I have with roasters and with farmers, whenever we have that opportunity to connect people with coffees that really, light up their world. So as a green coffee importer, we really think about it in terms of matchmaking. And so whenever a roaster gets that coffee that fits perfectly based on my advice or my thinking of how it will fit, that's super thrilling to me. I love that moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that, for me, that was one of the aha moments that I had in that original training that I took with you. Was before that, everything had seemed just kind of almost like a trade secret. No one was really talking about roasting dynamics or what changes were happening in certain portions of the roast. It was all kind of very mystical, and everyone had their own way of doing it, and you didn't really know. I mean, when I was roasting on an old Ambex at that time, I didn't really know whether what I was doing was the right way or the wrong way. It was just the way that
Mm-hmm.
the guy that I bought the roaster from said to do it. And for me, having you demystify portions of the roast curve and understand what's going on, I'm a data nerd and a science nerd, so understanding that, hey, this is actually a scientific process and a chemical process that's happening. That demystification was my aha moment, and made me feel confident that I could do this and make really good coffee as a result. So I totally get that, and what a great answer. I've been getting a couple of comments that there might be some connection issues. Is anybody, Joe, are you coming through? Am I coming clear on your end?
You look clear to me, and I look clear to me. So I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure. So.
All right. Well, we'll just press forward then.
Okay.
The main reason for us to be here today was to talk about the current state of affairs in the, coffee supply chain. So, I know that that's like a very grand scope of a discussion topic, and we could probably talk for hours on that. From my perspective, when I think about the impacts that we're not necessarily able to read about in the everyday newspaper, it goes back to the producer and exporter and importer level. So I think that's kind of where I wanted to focus some of the conversation today. Have you been, I know you were in Honduras right before all the shutdown happened.
Yep.
I mean, are there any experiences that you can share from that, or have you heard anything coming out of any of your producing partners that alludes to the difficulties that they're having through harvesting without their normal workforce, or anything like that? I think I just want to leave the question open and hear some of the experiences that you've had over the last few months.
Definitely. Yeah, we know that coffee is one of the most labor intensive crops that there is. It requires a lot of human hands along the supply network. So whether that is picking the coffee or delivering the coffee to a mill, milling the coffee, bagging the coffee, all of those different steps require a lot of people, a lot of hands. And so um, where those hands cluster together, where humans get together closely in proximity, all of those different points along the supply chain have certainly been affected. A lot of organizations, mills, exporters have um, put some boundaries, I guess you would say, in place to where when you're delivering your cherry, you have to stay 6 feet away from people. You have to wear masks. You have to wear gloves. If you are working in coffee farms, as a picker, you have to be separate and distant from each other. But one of the biggest things that we're hearing is that pickers are just simply not showing up. You know,
Yeah.
pickers are saying this is not the amount that you're going to pay me to go into a field with other people or into a farm with other people is not worth the risk of me getting this disease. And you have to understand that in a lot of coffee growing regions, healthcare is a really difficult thing to come by in general. And so with a new disease that is basically pretty devastating with a high risk of death, there is a lot of unknown around this disease. And so that fear evokes a change in how people go about their daily lives in a big way. And a lot of countries are taking this very seriously, as opposed to the US, which is kind of like, oh yeah, wear your mask if you're politically aligned with wearing your mask, or don't if you're not politically aligned with it. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world is not thinking about it in terms of political alignment or anything like that, but they're actually taking serious measures to ensure that their people are safe.
Right.
Because they know the cost that is involved on the healthcare system if a bunch of people come down with this disease. And so delivering cherry to a mill is a much more slow process. Well, we know that the longer that a cherry is on a tree, the more likely it is going to wither on the tree, and that's going to affect quality. It's going to affect yield. The longer the cherry is off the tree before it gets milled, that's also going to affect quality in a very, very heavy way. So if that cherry is not delivered within 24 hours, or usually within the same day, it's going to start to decompose and rot immediately, and that's going to affect the way that that coffee tastes. So
Yep.
each point along the chain is being delayed and elongated, and that is going to affect maybe not end yield number, but definitely end quality level. Um, a good story for me, basically, I came back from Honduras. I want to say it was March 7th or 8th, something like that. And there were 2 bags of coffee that I needed to fly to the United States for a project that I was doing with those coffees. And they shut down things so much so that in order to get those 2 bags out, the um, farm that I was working with actually had to drive outside of the main highways because
Wow.
the local townships were literally shutting down all of the highway systems in Honduras in order
Wow.
to not allow people from the outside to come in and bring in COVID-19. So this organization went through the process of driving it, what would have taken normally, 4 to 6 hours, something like that. Ended up taking them a couple of days to navigate around and get the
My God,
coffee. Exactly.
for two bags.
So for 2 bags, yes, for a super special project. So, and I
Wow.
didn't know that they had done all of this until they had delivered the coffee, or else I would have probably told them, we'll figure something else out. You don't have to
Yeah.
go through all of that trouble. But they were determined to get that coffee to us. So, the amount of struggle that is involved just in normal production of coffee is very high, and coffee is always a very high risk product. So couple that with what's going on now, and we are seeing some delays. A lot of importers are saying, "Oh, we're not delayed," but then as the coffee, is supposed to land, they're like, "No, maybe another week. Well, maybe another week on top of that." So there
Yeah.
are definitely delays happening.
Yeah.
Um, and some of the delays are happening in weird places that you would maybe not expect. Like, for instance, just here in the US, if your coffee is warehoused in a third party warehouse, the chance of them working at 25% staff or something like that is very high. So even just shipping lanes here in the US are delayed.
Yeah.
Um,
We
Postal
experienced.
services are delayed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it was right in, I mean, you were talking about the different reactions different countries have had. So our March and April shipping lanes were super tight, and we had to be a little bit more flexible and order ahead and stock up a little bit. But we were able to get the coffee. And then, I mean, even as early as May, things are, I mean, at this point, things are almost back to normal as far as like shipping is concerned. So it's crazy how quickly everything constricted for us here in the US, and then everybody, within a matter of a couple of months pretty much just got antsy, and now it's kind of like, all right, well, everything's back to normal again. And I
Hmm.
remember hearing from, I was trading some Instagram messages. I think our friends from Finkature and Pump are on. I saw them join a minute ago if they're still on. I've been trading some Instagram messages with them over the course of, even in early March when all this stuff was happening. And they had already been quarantined and were literally not allowed to leave their house, even though
Yeah.
they're up in the mountains, an hour and a half outside of the closest city. And the chances of them actually becoming a source for like a large outbreak was so minimal, but the country was taking it so seriously. It was
Yep.
really shocking for me to see that reaction and the extreme disparity in our reaction as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as the harvest continues and coffee gets put on down to port and put on boats and shipped to us to see what the reaction of us as a consuming country will be. Do you think
Yeah.
there's going to be any reaction to that quality difference that you were referring to?
Yeah. Well, one of the other, I guess we could call it a reaction. One of the other reactions that we're seeing is that here on the U.S. side, a lot of roasters are down in how much they're able to sell because cafes are closed. People aren't moving around as much. Wholesale sales are up, grocery store sales are up, online sales are up, but not to the proportion of what retail usually can generate.
Yeah,
So overall, we're seeing usually between 40 and 60% down for companies here in the US. So what a lot of roasters have done is just cancel their contracts. They have called especially in the direct trade world where there's not as much recourse for a farmer to say, no, you have to take the coffee. You contracted it with us. You have to take it. Roasters are just canceling their contracts hand over fist. And so then farmers are stuck without being able to sell these coffees that are their bread and butter, their higher dollar, higher quality coffees, and those coffees aren't shipping. So that is not only affecting the quality of the coffee because it's just sitting there and not getting used, but that's also creating kind of a glut of these coffees that are going to probably be discounted heavily and really have a negative effect on these farmers that were relying upon these relationships.
yeah.
Um, it's kind of
So
a devastating time.
for
Hmm.
those of us that might not be super familiar with the farming process, preservation process, we had a question about whether there was anything that could be done in the country to actually increase the longevity of the coffee? Could there be anything done to preserve it before it hits the mill? Can you just walk through a little bit about what actually happens before the coffee leaves the country of origin, and how, what steps they could possibly take, or just even agriculturally speaking, what the life cycle of the coffee is like?
For sure. So as you think about coffee, um, from a quality perspective, the quality in a coffee seed is kind of like a bell curve, right? So as the coffee ripens, it's gaining quality. And when it hits peak ripeness for whatever variety that is, that ripeness may look a little different depending on your variety. As it hits that peak, that's when it needs to be removed from the tree. And then immediately the seed needs to be somehow removed from the cherry, and it needs to go into that milling process. Up until that point, it's either gaining quality, or then after that point, it's losing quality. So the farmer that's growing very, very high quality coffee needs to have pickers on the farm, or needs to be picking themselves on the farm at that moment of peak ripeness. If they don't, then they're getting either overripe or underripe coffee, and they're not going to hit the scores that are required in order to reap a higher price point.
Yep.
If that coffee, once removed from the tree, doesn't get to the mill quickly, then it begins to rot. And that rot turns into something that makes the coffee taste kind of boozy, or if it stays out of the mill longer than that, that boozy flavor turns into actual like rotten fruit flavors, into like really, really composty, disgusting flavors. And that happens very quickly. Because as soon as you remove that cherry, there's going to be a hole at the top of that cherry where the stem used to be. Bacteria gets in there and just starts to decay that coffee. It's not like a clean fermentation like you would get from yeast, which is what happens usually during the fermentation phase. This is a rotting, a molding, and creates some very strong off flavors. And so you could have a coffee that, when ripe, if it's picked ripe, if it's milled in the correct amount of time, may score 88 points, which is a very, very high quality coffee. But if you let it go a little bit further, that score drops. And for every point that score drops, that's money that the farmer is not going to be able to make. So an 84 point coffee is going to reap a much, much lower price per pound than an 88 point coffee. So it's in the farmer's interest to get that to the mill as soon as possible. Now, at the mill level, you can sometimes elongate the amount of time that you have the coffee in fermentation, or especially the amount of time that you have the coffee drying. But if you think about having a patio, let's say that your drying space is, let's say, 2,000 square feet or something like that. Well, you can only fit so much coffee on that 2,000 square foot area. And so if you have more coffee coming to the mill, you need to move that coffee along so that the new coffee can then dry. So there's no real way to slow this down. Once the coffee is dried, then they can put it into a resting phase where the coffee kind of equalizes. Usually that takes about 4 to 6 weeks where it rests. But if you let it rest too long, then it'll over dry, and it won't ship well. So everything needs to happen on a timeline that's pretty strict. And the way that the coffee supply network has been built is around this timeline. The way that shipping lanes have been built, the way that the whole network kind of functions is around a pretty standard timeline. So as you hit one snag along that supply chain, it begins to back everything else up. And so what one farmer may be doing on one part of on a mountain is going to affect the other farmer's coffee as it goes through that supply network.
Yeah, so it seems, one of the phrases that we've been hearing a lot around here is pivoting. So, our old business model isn't necessarily working as well as we would have expected because of all the shutdowns and et cetera. So we're going to pivot and do something new. Like we started doing online classes here, and it might be easy for service-minded businesses like that, but when you're talking about something that is so closely dialed into that timeline you described, there's really no opportunity to pivot. A lot of these farmers are not, they don't own their own shipping lines or anything like that, or even the mills, so you're really dependent on the the schedules and the timeline of everything else that's happening around you. And so that it's just crazy. It's crazy to think about the ripple effect that this is all going to have. And you know, it's one of those things that it's not newsworthy while it's occurring, right? I mean, we're talking about things that take a matter of weeks, a couple of months, you know, completing the harvest, getting it on boats, getting it over here. And you know, one of my concerns is that we're not really paying enough attention to what's going on as a coffee community, and then 6 months from now we're going to be tasting these coffees, and everyone's all of a sudden going to perk up and go, what's up with the coffee harvest? Like, why are all these scores lower? And you know, we're going to say, well, 6 months ago all this stuff was happening, and we really didn't have any opportunity to do it any differently. So then, as a consuming country, we're gonna start to get really weird about it. 6 months down the line, when we didn't really know what was going on or care what was going on in the moment that it was happening. So,
Yep.
it's just going to be really interesting to see how this flows downstream to the people that are actually drinking the coffee at the end of the day.
Yep. Yeah, and I see a comment here from Particular Coffee. We stored it in a climatized warehouse inside Grain Pro bags for naturals. 5 months could improve quality if the water activity inside is a proper range. Now, there are some things that you can do like that. You know, the storage of the green coffee for a longer amount of time. Certainly, if you have the storage, if you have the Grain Pro, if you have climatized warehouse, if you have a freezer warehouse even, you can elongate the life of green coffee. The problem is that that's still creating the same kind of bottleneck. You know, that coffee is still not moving when that coffee normally would have been moving. And so then there's no new coffee moving into those warehouses. And those kinds of facilities are very rare and for very small amounts of coffee. The other part of that is any coffee that you have sitting on the shelf that is not moving and being sold, somebody is financing that coffee. And as that coffee is being financed, that coffee is getting higher and higher in its price, while also still, you know, you're not going to flatline the coffee's quality. It's not just going to stay static. It's still deteriorating, just at a slower rate. And so if you have a coffee that's dropping in its quality while increasing in its increasing in its price, then that is still not going to be a good long-term solution. You know, that may get us through the next 4 to 6 months, but as this crisis drags on, especially if we see this double into next harvest period for a lot of these countries, I'm scared of what the results are going to be. You know, I'm scared for the coffee roasting companies, and I'm not a doomsday kind of guy. But I know that coffee roasting companies are really, really strapped right now. If they're buying 50% less now, and this continues to go on for another 6 months to a year, that's going to have some very strong repercussions. So we just need to be prepared for it and figure out what we can do. I think that, you know, if we're selling 50% less coffee, the coffee that we're selling, we should be selling for 50% more cost so that we can pay more for those coffees as they come in, because coffee needs to be more valuable. On the inverse of that, at the same time that we're seeing all of these delays and all of this lower amount of sales in our specialty segment, we're also seeing the largest crop that Brazil has ever seen. Right. We're also seeing a US dollar that is really strong. And so the price of coffee is actually going down instead of up. This downward pressure on the price of coffee and this downward pressure on the demand for coffee is very strange, very unique. So I don't know. It doesn't look very good.
I mean, we recently saw the same oil here in the U.S. You know, a commodity product that had some price wars going on, and so the price of the crude was going down, but also our demand was going down significantly because of the, you know, decrease in travel. So, you know, and we saw gas prices here that were the lowest in my memory anyway. And, you know, you really have to think, and that's the reason that we're having this conversation here, is to try and create conversations about what the long-term impacts of that are. And, roasters in the short term might think it's great for getting, a C price that's $1, but when coffee farmers can no longer pay to produce their coffee, and the thing that we're left with at 5-10 years from now is a homogenized product that can only come out of one country because they're mechanized to such a degree that they can still make coffee for $1 a pound and make money at it. That's not the purpose. That's not the heart and the soul and the passion of why most people are in the coffee industry. So hopefully conversations like this can instill some idea of what happens prior to you taking that bag of coffee off the shelf or grabbing that cup of coffee at your local coffee shop or coffee roaster. So that's, we're hitting the nail on the head of why we're even having this conversation in the first place. So, Joe, do you have any suggestions or comments? From a consumer perspective, are there any things that we can do to try and, understand a little bit more? Are there resources that people can access to understand what's going on? I know it's kind of hard because this is like a global pandemic, so there's not something that you can do, so to speak, but are there any resources that you can share with us?
I think that the number one thing that you should do is just go out and buy coffee. You should keep buying coffee. You should keep drinking coffee. Keep the coffee flowing as best you can in your house. If you're a consumer, you should probably invest in a good grinder and start brewing that coffee at home every single day to the best of your abilities. Pop a can of Pure Intentions every single day. So the more coffee you drink, the more we can get this logjam starting to flow again. And as we break the logjam up, that's going to give us a better opportunity to see some recovery from this. Also, wear your mask. Please wear a mask. It's not a political thing. If every person in the US were to wear a mask for 2 weeks, we would be done with this crisis in the US. So just put your mask on. Stop being a baby. It's not about politics. I know that it is uncomfortable. So if you're uncomfortable in your mask, just stay home. Just stay home and order your coffee online. It's a very simple equation. If you don't exchange viruses, the virus won't move. If you do, the virus is going to continue to move, and you're probably going to get it, and you're probably going to get really sick, and you may die, and then that's also going to affect our coffee market. So put your mask on, stay inside. We can get through this more quickly if we're all in this together. Tell your friends and family to put a mask on, and tell them to buy coffee online.
Yep. And this is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this link so that everyone can hear Joe's amazing, very succinct way of getting through this crisis, because that wholeheartedly agree on our side as well. I know we're right at 1 o'clock here, and I want to be respectful of Joe's time. Are there any quick questions based on the content or anything else? Or any people had been asking questions along the way, but I just want to make sure that I give folks a chance to finish out any thoughts they might have. Just in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to come through, Joe, I wanted to say thank you so much. I know that you're a very busy person. The fact that you took the time out of your day to join us and share your insights means the world to us, and I hope that everyone that attended today got a lot out of it. I will be putting this on YouTube, so please,
cool.
For those of you that only got in halfway through, we've had people joining in the last 5 minutes. If you're interested in hearing Joe's very, very poignant discussion about the state of the coffee supply chain, supply network as it stands today, please check out our YouTube channel. I'll have it up by the end of the day today. So thank you very much, Joe. You're awesome.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Have a great afternoon. See you guys.
All right. Bye.